The Sand Creek Massacre was an atrocity in the American Indian Wars that occurred on November 29, 1864, when a 700-man force of Colorado Territory militia attacked and destroyed a peaceful village of Cheyenne and Arapaho in southeastern Colorado Territory, killing and mutilating an estimated 70 to 163 Native Americans, about two-thirds of whom were women and children. The location has been designated the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site and is administered by the National Park Service. Background: by the terms of the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie between the United States and 7 Indian nations, including the Cheyenne and Arapaho, the United States recognized that the Cheyenne and Arapaho held a vast territory encompassing the lands between the North Platte River and Arkansas River and eastward from the Rocky Mountains to western Kansas. This area included present-day southeastern Wyoming, southwestern Nebraska, most of eastern Colorado, and the westernmost portions of Kansas. In November 1858, however, the discovery of gold in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, then part of the Kansas Territory, brought on the Pikes Peak Gold Rush. There was a flood of European-American migrants across Cheyenne and Arapaho lands. They competed for resources and some settlers tried to stay. Colorado territorial officials pressured federal authorities to redefine the extent of Indian lands in the territory, and in the fall of 1860, A.B. Greenwood, Commissioner of Indian Affairs, arrived at Bent's new fort along the Arkansas River to negotiate a new treaty. On February 18, 1861, 6 chiefs of the Southern Cheyenne and 4 of the Arapaho signed the Treaty of Fort Wise with the United States, in which they ceded most of the lands designated to them by the Fort Laramie Treaty. The Cheyenne chiefs included Black Kettle, White Antelope, Lean Bear, Little Wolf, and Tall Bear. The Arapaho chiefs included Little Raven, Storm, Shavehead, Big Mouth, and Niwot, or Left Hand. The new reserve, less than 1/13 the size of the 1851 reserve, was located in eastern Colorado between the Arkansas River and Sand Creek. Some bands of Cheyenne, including the Dog Soldiers, a militaristic band of Cheyenne and Lakota that had evolved, beginning in the 1830s, were angry at the chiefs who had signed the treaty. They disavowed the treaty and refused to abide by its constraints. They continued to live and hunt in the bison-rich lands of eastern Colorado and western Kansas, becoming increasingly belligerent over the tide of white migration across their lands. Tensions were high, particularly in the Smoky Hill River country of Kansas, along which whites had opened a new trail to the gold fields. Cheyenne, who opposed the treaty, said that it had been signed by a small minority of the chiefs without the consent or approval of the rest of the tribe, that the signatories had not understood what they signed, and that they had been bribed to sign by a large distribution of gifts. The whites, however, claimed that the treaty was of solemn obligation. Officials took the position that Indians who refused to abide by it were hostile and planning a war. The beginning of the American Civil War in 1861 led to the organization of military forces in Colorado Territory. In March 1862, the Colorado Volunteers defeated a Confederate army from Texas in the Battle of Glorieta Pass in New Mexico by destroying their supply wagons, forcing them to retreat. The Confederates returned to Texas, and the 1st Regiment of Colorado Volunteers returned to Colorado Territory. They were then mounted as a home guard under the command of Colonel John Chivington. Chivington and Colorado Territorial Governor John Evans adopted a hard line against Indians, whom white settlers accused of stealing livestock. Without any declaration of war, in April 1864 Colorado soldiers began attacking and destroying a number of Cheyenne camps, the largest of which included about 70 lodges, about 10% of the housing capacity of the entire Cheyenne Nation. On May 16, 1864, a detachment under Lieutenant George S. Air crossed into Kansas and encountered Cheyenne in their summer buffalo hunting camp at Big Bushes near the Smoky Hill River. Cheyenne chiefs Lean Bear and Star approached the soldiers to signal their peaceful intent, but they were shot down by Air's troops. This incident touched off the war of retaliation by the Cheyenne in Kansas. Damn any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians, and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians. Kill and scalp all, big and little, nits make lice. Carl. John Milton Chivington. As conflict between the Indians and white settlers and soldiers in Colorado continued, many of the Cheyenne and Arapaho, including bands under Cheyenne chiefs Black Kettle and White Antelope, were resigned to negotiating a peace. The chiefs had sought to maintain peace despite pressures from the soldiers and settlers. In July 1864, Colorado Governor John Evans sent a circular to the Plains Indians, inviting those who were friendly to go to a place of safety at Fort Leon on the eastern plains, where their people would be given provisions and protection by the United States troops. Attack. Black Kettle, leading chief of around 800 mostly Southern Cheyenne, had led his band, joined by some Arapahoes under Chief Niwot, to Fort Leon in compliance with provisions of a peace parley held in Denver in September 1864. After a while, the Native Americans were requested to relocate to Big Sandy Creek, less than 40 miles northwest of Fort Leon, with the guarantee of perfect safety remaining in effect. The Dog Soldiers, who had been responsible for many of the attacks and raids on whites, were not part of this encampment. On the 29th of November, assured by promises of protection by the commander of Fort Leon, most of the warriors left to hunt buffalo, leaving only about 75 men, plus all the women and children in the village. The men who remained stayed were mostly too old or too young to hunt. Black Kettle flew an American flag, with a white flag tied beneath it, over his lodge, as the Fort Leon commander had advised him. This was to show he was friendly and forestall any attack by the Colorado soldiers. Meanwhile, Chivington and 700 men of the 1st Colorado Cavalry, 3rd Colorado Cavalry, and a company of the 1st Regiment New Mexico Volunteer Cavalry, rode to Fort Leon. They then set out for Black Kettle's encampment. James Beckworth, noted frontiersman, acted as guide for Chivington. On the evening of November 28, the soldiers and militia drank whiskey and celebrated their anticipated easy victory. The following morning, Chivington gave the order to attack. Two officers, Captain Silas Soule and Lieutenant Joseph Kramer, commanding Company D and Company K of the 1st Colorado Cavalry Companies D and K, refused to obey and told their men to hold fire. However, the rest of Chivington's men immediately attacked the village, ignoring the American flag and a white flag that was run up shortly after the attack began. They murdered as many of the Indians as they could. I saw the bodies of those lying there cut all to pieces, worse mutilated than any I ever saw before, the women cut all to pieces, with knives, scalped, the brains knocked out, children 2 or 3 months old, all ages lying there, from sucking infants up to warriors. By whom were they mutilated? By the United States troops. John S. Smith, Congressional Testimony of Mr. John S. Smith, 1865. I saw one squaw lying on the bank, whose leg had been broken. A soldier came up to her with a drawn saber. She raised her arm to protect herself. He struck, breaking her arm. She rolled over, and raised her other arm. He struck, breaking that, and then left her without killing her. I saw one squaw cut open, with an unborn child lying by her side. Robert Bent, New York Tribune, 1879. There was one little child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead, and this little child was behind, following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling in the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and draw up his rifle and fire. He missed the child. Another man came up and said, "Let me try the son of AB. I can hit him." He got down off his horse, kneeled down, and fired at the little child, but he missed him. A third man came up, and made a similar remark, and fired, and the little fellow dropped. Major Anthony, New York Tribune, 1879. Fingers and ears were cut off the bodies for the jewelry they carried. The body of White Antelope, lying solitarily in the creek bed, was a prime target. Besides scalping him, the soldiers cut off his nose, ears, and testicles, the last for a tobacco pouch. Stan Hoig jizzed to think of that dog Chivington and his dirty hounds, up Tharas and Creek. His men shot down squaws, and blew the brains out of little innocent children. You call sick soldiers Christians, do ye? And Indians savages? What dare ye? S'pose our Heavenly Father, who made both them and us, thinks of these things? I tell you what, I don't like a hostile redskin any more than you do. And when they are hostile, I've fought hard as any man. But I never yet drew a bead on a squaw or papoose, and I despise the man who would. Kit Carson. The natives, lacking artillery, could not make much resistance. Some of the natives cut horses from the camp's herd and fled up Sand Creek or to a nearby Cheyenne camp on the headwaters of the Smoky Hill River. Others, including trader George Bent, fled upstream and dug holes in the sand beneath the banks of the stream. They were pursued by the troops and fired on, but many survived. Cheyenne warrior Morning Star said that most of the Indian dead were killed by cannon fire, especially those firing from the south bank of the river at the people retreating up the creek. In testimony before a congressional committee investigating the massacre, Chivington claimed that as many as 500 to 600 Indian warriors were killed. Historian Alan Brinkley wrote that 133 Indians were killed, 105 of whom were women and children. White eyewitness John S. Smith reported that 70 to 80 Indians were killed, including 20 to 30 warriors, which agrees with Brinkley's figure as to the number of men killed. George Bent, the son of the American William Bent and a Cheyenne mother, who was in the village when the attack came and was wounded by the soldiers, gave two different accounts of the natives' loss. On March 15, 1889, he wrote to Samuel F. Tappan that 137 people were killed, 28 men and 109 women and children. However, on April 30, 1913, when he was very old, he wrote that about 53 men and 110 women and children were killed and many people wounded. Bent's first figures are in close accord with those of Brinkley and agree with Smith as to the number of men who were killed. Although initial reports indicated 10 soldiers killed and 38 wounded, the final tally was 4 killed and 21 wounded in the 1st Colorado Cavalry and 20 killed or mortally wounded and 31 other wounded in the 3rd Colorado Cavalry, adding up to 24 killed and 52 wounded. D. Brown wrote that some of Chivington's men were drunk and that many of the soldiers' casualties were due to friendly fire, but neither of these claims is supported by Gregory F. Michno or Stan Hoig in their books devoted to the massacre. Before Chivington and his men left the area, they plundered the teepees and took the horses. After the smoke cleared, Chivington's men came back and killed many of the wounded. They also scalped many of the dead, regardless of whether they were women, children or infants. Chivington and his men dressed their weapons, hats and gear with scalps and other body parts, including human fetuses and male and female genitalia. They also publicly displayed these battle trophies in Denver's Apollo Theater and area saloons. 3 Indians who remained in the village are known to have survived the massacre: George Bent's brother Charlie Bent, and 2 Cheyenne women who were later turned over to William Bent.